As for other teams around the country, if you want to talk about just like what this playoff meant and what this game meant to college football, I actually think that this was a really important moment for the sport. And not just because like, oh, it wasn't an SEC team. It doesn't matter if it wasn't an SEC team. It was the type of team that won. It was Michigan and the way that they built themselves. And now I'm going to get into those stats that I was talking about earlier. You see, before this year, if you weren't recruiting in the top 4 or 5 in the country annually for 4 straight or 5 straight years, you really didn't have a chance to win the national championship. You really didn't. You know, I go back to like, for a long time, for a decade plus, go back to like Bama's championship over Notre Dame. That Notre Dame team goes undefeated and rolls in there, and it's like, the gap between Notre Dame and Alabama was so large. Gap between, you know, you start thinking of some of those semifinal games. I think Bama played a Michigan State team that got themselves into the playoffs. And it's like the gap between the top 3 or 4, but mostly like 3 teams in the country and everybody else was so large that there wasn't a lot of hope for anyone else around college football. It was just like, how many times are we going to get Bama, Clemson, Bama, Georgia in the national championship game, or that could actually win the national championship? That's how it felt for a long time in college football. And the reason is because of the lack of mobility, right? Players couldn't go anywhere. And because of that, like the recruiting and the dominance in recruiting was a foregone conclusion that those teams were going to be in the spots where they were at the end of the year. And you would have to be in the top 4 or 5 on an annual basis for 4 or 5 years in order to win the national championship. You would have to be, as far as the composite, right? When it just takes a look at your roster and how did you build that roster and how talented is your roster? You had to be a top 5 roster to win the national championship. And if you weren't, it wasn't even close. It's not like, oh man, we're almost there. We can scheme ourselves to it. It wasn't even close. There was a huge gap until now. College football is changing, and it's changing for the better. It's changing for the better. Michigan, over the last 4 recruiting cycles, not 24 because those players aren't obviously there. From 2020 to 2023, there's been 4 recruiting cycles. In 2020, they were the 10th ranked class. 21, they were the 13th ranked class. 22, the 9th ranked class. And last year, the 17th ranked class. So if you total those up and average them out, they were outside of the top 10 on average in their recruiting class, and they just won the national championship. Their composite this year for talent, team talent across the board, 14th in the country, won the national championship. They only have 2 5-star players, won the national championship. That is unbelievable news for all of college football. Do you know how many teams and programs and fan bases should have an enormous amount of hope moving forward now that we have a different era in our sport? I'm thinking about so many teams that right now should be thrilled with what's going on. Some of them have recruited and done a much better job than even this at Michigan. It goes to show you that like you can block and tackle and develop your way to a national championship. Now, is it hard? Yeah, of course it's hard. And they had to go and get beat badly a couple of years ago by Georgia, and they lost a tight one to TCU. But think about the last 2 years. We've had Georgia, TCU, Michigan, and Washington are our 4 finalists in the national championship game. Only one of those is a lot different, and that's Georgia. The others are actually fairly similar. A lot of development going on, a lot of veteran leadership going on. This is entering. This is why I say at the opening of the show, this is why I said this phrase. We are entering the golden age of college football. This era of college football should and will be really great. Think of how many teams have ultimate hope that they can go and do what Michigan did. Think of Ole Miss and the way that they're recruiting right now and the hope that this gives them. What Washington just did should make Oregon feel like they can go and do it. A team like Utah, they feel like they can do it. This makes a team like Penn State think to themselves, well, why can't we do that? How much hope does it give people in East Lansing, knowing that they did build a program that competed with and beat Michigan several years under Mark D'Antonio? Can they do it again under Jonathan Smith? You know, how encouraging is this for a Texas A&M that tried to go match the guys at the top, and now they've had to change directions? The fact that Michigan was at the bottom of the barrel in the COVID year, and 3 years later, they're 40-3 and winning a national championship. Who else can win a national championship? Maybe it's not just Alabama and Georgia and Clemson and Ohio State every single year. And you know what? This gives Ohio State a lot of hope. Think about it. Michigan's in the bottom of the barrel watching Ohio State play a national championship game. So, Ohio State fans, I know you don't feel great about what you saw on Monday night, but guess what? It can turn around very quickly. You might be there next year. Take a look at what's going on in the transfer portal right now. That's an incredibly talented team that all of a sudden the Buckeyes are going to have next year. All right. And it just goes to show you that it's not all just about the stars. And I know that that's been a common phrase over the last few years, right? That stars matter. And yeah, they do. They absolutely matter. But they're mattering less because there's more teams and the talent is spreading out. And I think that that's great for college football. And that's giving a lot of teams hope around the country. The last 8 title games featured at least one of Alabama, Georgia, or Clemson. Last 8. And now all of a sudden, you're entering into this era where a lot of teams are going to feel like they've got a chance to go out there and win the national championship. And I think that's a great thing. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. And you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.